Good morning and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Andrew Mollison. I am Chief Political Correspondent for the Cox newspapers and President of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome my fellow members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you who are listening to this program over one of the 303 national public radio stations or watching on one of the 2,300 cable systems affiliated with C-SPAN, the Cable Satellite Public Affairs Network. Before going any further, I'd like to remind our members of some coming events. This week, our luncheon guests are Health and Human Services Secretary Dr. Otis Bowen on Thursday, tomorrow, January 29, and outgoing White House spokesman Larry Speaks on Friday, January 30th. Next month, our guests include the Chairman and CEO of Chevron Corporation, George M. Keller, on February 3rd, B-1 bomber expert General Lawrence Scantz, rescheduled after the snowstorm, and he'll now be on February 4th, Energy Secretary John Harrington on February 18th, and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir on February 19th. I'd like to remind those of you in the audience that there are cards on your table, and if you have questions for our speaker today, put them on those cards, pass them up, and I'll ask as many as possible. I'd now like to introduce the guests at our head table, and I ask you to please hold your applause while I introduce the guests until their names are read, and then after I've read all the names, we could acknowledge them at one time. We'll start with Gary Thatcher of the Christian Science Monitor on the left, David Ottaway of the Washington Post, Richard Zimmerman, who's a member of our Speakers Committee who organized today's luncheon or breakfast, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, the Director of Information for the African National Congress, Gil Klein of Media General Newspapers, the Chairman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, Susan King of WRC-TV News, Channel 4, and Randall Robinson, Executive Director of Trans Africa. Almost 40 years ago, South African author Alan Paton wrote in Cry the Beloved Country, "There is a man sleeping in the grass, and over him is gathering the greatest storm of all these days." That storm is now gathered, and at its eye stands this morning's speaker. Seldom has a leader appeared before the National Press Club at a time when his country faces a more uncertain future. The only two certainties involving the developing war in South Africa, according to expatriate white South African editor Donald Woods, is that, quote, that the whites will lose and that the more fiercely they fight, the more comprehensively they will lose, unquote. Whatever the future holds for South Africa, the African National Congress will surely play a major role, as will its President General, Oliver Tambo, who is here with us today. The ANC has been banned in South Africa for more than a quarter of a century, and its titular head, Nelson Mandela, still is serving a life sentence for treason. Yet it remains the single most unifying force among the often feuding political and ethnic factions that make up South Africa's majority black population. Our speaker was born in Eastern Cape Province in 1917. After completing secondary education in Johannesburg, he won a scholarship to Fort Hare College. He later taught science and math at the secondary level until 1947. He founded the ANC Youth League along with Mr. Mandela. The League pressed the parent organization into a more militant stance, a militancy which has progressed to the point of being of concern to some in the West. Some believe that the role of communists within the ANC has been underemphasized by the press. But William Pascoe, an Africa analyst in the United States for the Conservative Heritage Foundation, said that within the ANC, quote, it's not a question of nationalists versus communists, but of radicals versus moderates, unquote. Mr. Tambo rose through the ranks of the ANC, and by 1952 had also qualified as an attorney. Following the Sharpsville massacre in 1960, it became evident that the white minority regime in Pretoria was preparing to ban the ANC and to detain its leaders and charge them with treason. It was decided that our speaker should leave his country to work abroad for the total isolation of South Africa's apartheid regime. It is in that cause that Mr. Tambo has come to the United States and to the podium of the National Press Club. Now, here is what Senate Minority Leader Robert Dole said about the meeting scheduled for today between Mr. Tambo and the United States Secretary of State, George Shultz. Shultz, he said, should use the meeting, quote, to pressure Oliver Tambo to renounce terrorism. Meeting with Mr. Tambo without that kind of precondition comes perilously close to sending the wrong kind of message on terrorism, the same wrong kind of message that may have inadvertently been sent in our arms dealings with Iran, unquote. Here is what Nelson Mandela has said about today's speaker, quote, Oliver Tambo is more than a brother to me. He is my greatest friend and comrade for nearly 50 years. There is no difference between his views and mine. In my introduction, I have mentioned what other people have said about Mr. Tambo. Members and guests of the National Press Club, we now have a chance to hear his views. I present to you Oliver R. Tambo, President General of the African National Congress.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it is a singular honor to the ANC to be given the opportunity to address this extremely important body, the United States media. We are in the United States on what has turned out to be a most important visit, perhaps more important than any we have had before. The reason is, in the first instance, that we have found the issue of apartheid in South Africa most topical. We have found that the American people are deeply concerned about developments in South Africa. And therefore, we have been welcomed with great enthusiasm because we came to talk about a matter that is running deep in the hearts and minds of the American people today. We welcome this development, and it has made our visit most worthwhile. Wherever we have gone, we have sensed a deep feeling of genuine support for us and a desire to bring about the end of the system of apartheid, which is tormenting not only the people of South Africa and Namibia, but the people of the whole region of Southern Africa. This feeling of identity with our cause seems to be spread across the length and breadth of this country. A significant feature of this interest is the invitation extended to the ANC to meet the Secretary of State, Mr. George Shultz. The meeting takes place in the context, therefore, of an American people who feel a sense of involvement with what is taking place in South Africa. And we believe the Secretary of State, the administration, decided to invite us in order to see whether there is a way out of that situation. What the ANC can offer, how it sees that situation, how it sees the way forward. Any observer of a scene does himself make an assessment and develops an opinion of how things might be done, how better things might be done. The administration is in that position. It is capable of having an opinion about the way forward out of the apartheid system in South Africa to a society where the government governs by the will of those it governs. And so we have welcomed this invitation. I am aware that not everyone agrees about the meeting, but it is a meeting first and foremost between the Secretary of State and one who represents a people who are involved. Whether you agree or disagree, and if you disagree, perhaps that's all the more reason why you should meet, to discuss those differences. Indeed, we have found, since coming into the United States, that one of the key issues in South Africa, as far as many people in this country are concerned, is exactly the ANC and the way it is going about the business of bringing about an end to the apartheid system. We have found concentrated attention on the methods used by the ANC. The question that has been referred to as the violence of the ANC, the terrorism of the ANC. We would have liked to reach a position where we can clear the minds of the American people on this issue, to the extent that it may operate as a hindrance to the measure of their positive involvement in South Africa. There is another matter that is worrying the American people about the ANC. Its association with communism. Wherever we have gone, these two questions have been raised. We wish we could reach a position where there is clarity about them. and we continue to try to explain. And I should like to devote some time to these questions today, briefly. But before that, may I give you some background about the ANC in terms of the leaders who have served on it. The founder, Dr. Prixley Seme, was a student of Columbia University in New York. He spent a number of years in this country. When he arrived back in South Africa, he had this idea of the formation of a national organization to fight for the rights of the Africans. He saw the Africans united across tribal boundaries, one body of people. And he was the main mover behind the formation of the ANC. But the ANC was formed not only by the people of South Africa, what we call Lesotho, Botswana, Swaziland today, Zambia. These were represented at the formation of the African National Congress. It's an organization of that whole region. The kings of Swaziland have served. The kings of Lesotho were there. The chiefs of Botswana, what was then Barotseland, they were there. So the ANC is a regional body. It relates to that region. It has been there since 1912. It is part of the history of South Africa. It has become well known today in South Africa among all our people. It is supported by them. Dr. John Dube is another figure who featured in the early days of the formation of the ANC. He was the first president. He was a graduate of Oberlin University. Went back from the ANC. Another prominent leader of the ANC, one of the presidents who served for 2 sessions, was a minister of the Methodist Church, Reverend Mahabane. Twice he came on as president of the ANC. Dr. A.B. Kluma, who took over from him, studied in the United States as well. Dr. Z.K. Matthews was a student of Yale University. He was, in 1952-53, in the United States lecturing at Yale University as a visiting professor. When he came back to South Africa with an idea, the idea of the people of South Africa coming together to say, what kind of South Africa do we want? We want freedom. But in what context? How should the South Africa we want to look like? What are we to understand by freedom? We don't want apartheid. What do we want? Mr. President, I was present at a conference of the African National Congress in Queenstown, 1953, when he introduced this idea. And it was adopted by conference. It was decided to call what was named a Congress of the People. That drew up what we call the Freedom Charter of the ANC. The Freedom Charter reads much of the way like the American Declaration of Independence. That is the document that has guided the policy of the ANC since its adoption in 1955. There has been no deviation. And as years have gone by, the Freedom Charter has become accepted widely throughout South Africa. It's not a perfect document. It raises questions, which we have taken time to explain, and it stands today as one of the documents that will be most material in any consideration of a future South Africa. Indeed, lately, the business community, the Federated Chamber of Industries, for example, have produced their own charter. It all sounds like the Freedom Charter of the ANC. It's produced by business. It looks at the future of South Africa. The difference comes when this document deals with the economy of the country. But otherwise, the business community would say they go along with everything we say in the Freedom Charter. That is what gives the ANC the support it enjoys. It has come a long way. It has evolved in a particular way. But when we look at it today, you see communists in it. You see armed struggle. We think the question should be, how did this come about? As far as communism is concerned, you'll understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the ANC was formed before the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, 1917. When that event occurred, it affected people across the globe. Some accepted, some didn't. In South Africa, some accepted. Some Africans joined the Communist Party, which was formed in 1921. 1921. Members of the ANC then, some of them, not all, joined the Communist Party then. Members of the Communist Party joined the ANC. That's the history of this relationship. Through decades, presidents after presidents of the ANC have come and gone. There have been communists in South Africa. They have been serving on the head bodies of the ANC. When Reverend Mahabane, the Methodist minister, was president of the ANC, twice among members of his organization were communists. We are newcomers to this arrangement. It came before us. Indeed, as militant members of the Youth League that the president has referred to, we campaigned with Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu for the expulsion of communists from the ANC. And we were virtually laughed out of court was nonsensical. We had come late in the day. This was in the late 40s or the middle 40s. It was not possible. And we gave up. So, if there is a communist in the ANC, we say he is first and foremost a member of the ANC. He's not going to be expelled, which is what we wanted to do. Chief Luthuli, who is known in this country, a Nobel Peace Prize winner like Martin Luther King Jr., Chief Luthuli, headed an organization among whom were communists. And they followed him. It was the ANC. The Communist Party of South Africa admits, acknowledges that the ANC is the leader of the liberation movement and behaves that way. So it is part of our history, what you are seeing today. It has come over a period of time with an organization that has been there for 75 years now. It is true that there is a general expectation that where there is a communist, there is domination by the communist. There's a general expectation that way. That is not the experience of the ANC, or indeed of the people of South Africa. And we ask the American people to accept it, that in South Africa, among the victims of apartheid, this is not a problem, certainly not now. It has never been. It is not the issue. So we ask the American people, notwithstanding this, which may sound an anomaly, to support the ANC, if only because it is supported by the people of South Africa. I haven't had many people in South Africa, apart from P.W. Botha, say the ANC should not be supported, should not be met, should not be talked to, because it is communist dominated. Our people don't know this. Let me move quickly on from this question of communism and say that we'll be ready to answer more questions about it. But I thought I should give you this background. The question of armed struggle. I've heard it repeated several times in meetings that we've had, those present being reminded of what Senator Kennedy said about how that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. That is what happened to us. The ANC was not just non-violent in the sense that we sent delegations and deputations and drafted resolutions and sent them to the authorities, but that in the face of a campaign of violence against us, which was introduced by the apartheid regime when it came into power, in the face of that, we campaigned for non-violence on the part of our people. For us, non-violence became the subject of a campaign. It lasted a whole decade. I think for part of that time, Martin Luther King was carrying on a non-violent movement, leading a non-violent movement in the United States. About the same time, we were doing the same thing in South Africa. Except that we were subject to impossible provocation with the killings and the beatings up that were going on For a whole decade, it got from worse to worse. By the time Sharpeville came in 1960, scores of people had been killed by the violence, the physical violence of the authorities, the police, the killings. So we reached a point which mankind reaches sometimes, where it was not possible to go on any longer. It had become impossible to carry on with nonviolence. Impossible. At that point, it became inevitable that we change our strategy. And in addition to being non-violent, to be also violent. But we're not violent against people. We're violent against objects. There was another policy. We're also campaigning against our sabotage actions resulting in injury or death to any person. This was the subject of another campaign. This one didn't go on for 10 years. It went on for more than 20 years. Right up until about 1983. Selective sabotage in which there were no casualties. And newspaper reports quoting the authorities themselves said so many times, there was sabotage here, no casualties. It was not accidental, it was deliberate. The first time when there were what are called in South Africa civilian casualties, meaning white casualties, was after the South African army had crossed into Lesotho and massacred 42 people there. Members of the ANC, South Africans, as well as nationals of Lesotho. Only after that. Now, I think the American people are looking at what is happening today. We would like them to relate to how it came about. To say the ANC is terrorist and should not be met is to suggest that the leaders of this country should remain ignorant of what the ANC is saying. In a way, Botha is doing the same thing in South Africa. He doesn't want members of his party to have any contact with the ANC. Members of parliament, nationalist members of parliament, have been debarred from meeting the ANC, although we thought this would be a very good thing. They would come and argue their case, and we put our point of view, and perhaps we find agreement. At least we understand one another. Members of the religious community have been refused permission to see us, or told not to, because if they did, this would be an act of treachery. University professors of Afrikaans universities want to come and have meetings with the ANC. They are not allowed to. We think Secretary of State George Shultz is pointing the way out when he says we should meet the ANC. Those who refuse to meet the ANC are refusing to address the question of a solution to the South African problem. I must not take too much time. I've made reference to these two issues. So perhaps as to provoke more questions about them. But let me end up again by saying that the ANC is, in its origins, a regional organization. Our visit to the United States is supported by the independent states of Africa, as also by our people. because we need the United States on our side. So we would wish to remove all obstacles in the way of the United States coming over to our side. We have nothing to hide about our objectives. Most people have understood. Where people have not understood, we have been eager to explain ourselves, because we believe fervently in the justice of our cause. And we think the American people share that sense of the need for justice in South Africa as elsewhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There's no need to provoke further questions. We have more than 60 submitted so far. We'll try, and if you could possibly answer short, we'll at least try to ask a sampling of these before I know you have to move on. The first one says, the ANC is not the only black nationalist movement opposed to apartheid. Under what conditions, if any, will the ANC agree to a negotiated truce with the other groups, in particular Buthelezzi's organization?
The ANC believes that negotiations should involve the broad masses of our people. We should feel, if we go to negotiations, that we have not only a mandate, but a sense of participation by the people. As we see it, the negotiations would have to be preceded by a period in which the leaders of the people are moving freely among the people, picking up ideas and communicating ideas, addressing meetings, discussing the issues, the matters to be raised at any negotiations. Of course, we know what our people want, but we feel it's useful in this kind of situation that they should be actually involved if the negotiations are not to be a secret affair between a few people sitting quietly somewhere and dragging it on. In our view, therefore, before negotiations take place, the leaders who are imprisoned would be back among the people. They would be there. They would be participating in this process. Those who are outside would be back among the people. Organizations would have been unbanned. You know, the bans lifted. So that there is freedom of movement, of association, of consultation. Given that opportunity, there is no problem about who is going to participate, because that decision will be taken quite democratically. There's no problem about Oliver Tambo talking to the president of AZAPO and saying, how do we go about? What's your suggestion? Because we are discussing the future of our country, not the future of the ANC. If that happened, all the questions about who will represent the people on the one side would be resolved by the people themselves. So we haven't yet reached that stage. The call for the release of Nelson Mandela and others has been repeated 1,000 times. And even when the Eminent Persons group went to South Africa, it was one of the prerequisites of any consultations that all political prisoners should be released. That's how they saw it. We ourselves have said, to clear the air and enable us to prepare effectively and properly for serious negotiations, amongst other things, Nelson Mandela and other political prisoners should be released. But the question, therefore, does not arise now as to who will be there. And that applies to Gaja Buthelezi and anybody else. The question does not arise yet. It will be resolved by the general leadership of the country in consultation with the people when the proper time comes.
The next question is, does the ANC want military aid from the United States? Do you receive enough military aid from your allies now?
I'm sure that a time may well come when we will ourselves as the ANC need military aid from all over. That time may well come. We are receiving aid, military aid, from African countries, from socialist countries. And for the moment, that is sufficient for our present purposes. But our struggle has become a regional struggle in the best sense of that term. Nothing happens in South Africa which does not affect the countries of the region. They are under pressure militarily from South Africa in all sorts of ways, including the employment of bandits like MNR. That is an extension of the South African army. And Mozambique needs arms. That would help our situation. Support to the neighboring states in terms of military assistance, all of them, would most certainly be regarded as support for the cause against apartheid.
What would be the maximum that could be gained from your meeting today with the Secretary of State, and what would be the minimum?
Well, the minimum would be the fact of there having been a meeting. It's important. It's communication. It's happening for the first time, as you are saying, in 75 years. The ANC is known in this country, is known throughout the world. The ANC has been meeting heads of state all around the world, foreign ministers, numerous occasions. This and one or two countries were the exception, globally. So the fact of the meeting is itself important. The maximum, well, from our point of view, is really unattainable in terms of our demands. We don't expect to get everything we want. But let me say, the maximum, optimum position we would seek is that Secretary Schulz should say, now I understand about communism and violence. I now understand the matter better than I did before. This would be the best.
This questioner asks, could you state precisely whether you make a distinction between violence against hard military targets and soft civilian targets?
Well, in the South African context, it's really difficult to make the distinction. You have to define the word civilian specially. And if you define civilian to mean any civilian, black or white, then the current practice, as far as the regime is concerned anyway, is that there is no difference between hard and soft civilians. There has never been in the South African practice. Because every time they kill, they're killing a civilian. The children of Soweto were civilians. The massacre of Noli was a massacre of civilians. Mamelodi, women, civilians, all the time, civilians. When a policeman stands up, sees a child in front of him, aims his gun, pulls the trigger, and the child drops down dead. He has killed a civilian. But he is not called a civilian. At best, he is called a black. So black becomes something which you can kill at will, not civilian. The ANC has a history of more than 20 years, which I've referred to, of avoiding killing people. We could have killed hundreds of whites. Easy. We've got guns there. We could have used them. We could have blown them up. We have the capacity to explode bombs all over. We have not done it. We have issued instructions in an important annual policy statement this year. We have said our people must avoid, refuse, they must refuse to attack civilians, whether those civilians are black or white. But we are the only ones to refer to blacks as civilians. And we do not understand in a way why. Everybody talking about civilians is thinking of white civilians. If you knew the number of civilians who are being killed every day by the Pretoria regime, you wouldn't ask the question. But anyway, that is the position of the ANC.
There's two related questions here, which both express an opinion while asking, but I'm just going to ask them as they're written. Why has the ANC attacked and killed Zulu people? And please explain why you don't condemn the practice of necklacing.
The ANC has not attacked Zulu people. We've never done. There's no record of the ANC killing Zulu people. If the ANC were to kill Zulu people, we would have to go around Johannesburg. So we're to saying, are you Zulu? Yes. Are you Zulu? No. Okay. Are you Zulu? Because you can't tell the difference between Zulu and non-Zulu. I don't know what is meant by this. But recently, a group of armed men went into a house and killed 12 people, 7 of them children, all blacks. The leader of Inkatha, because these were identified as Inkatha people, and therefore, if you like, what you would call Zulus. And those killed were also Zulus. We don't see them as Zulus ourselves at all. We are just our people, Africans. But he admitted, in so many words, that yes, this was done by his Inkatha people. But they were retaliating for a person killed, he said, by the ANC. It was a massacre, and it had nothing to do with the ANC. It was not the last, but one of a series of that kind of thing which has been taking place in Natal. There are records, documentary evidence of that kind of thing taking place with the assistance of the South African police. They've gone from house to house in some of the townships looking for members of the UDF because they were members of the UDF. And there was a time when people left their houses and homes by day because they would be sought out and came back only in the night to sleep. A whole township was vacated during the day because of these groups which are led in and supervised by the police, because the police see them armed with all sorts of weapons, and they come in with them, and they look on. That's been going on, and it was this Inkatha group. So the ANC has not killed Zulus, and I would not even say it is Zulus killing Zulus. I would never make such a statement. It is a person who takes a certain political position and uses violence against those who oppose. Now, I think you mentioned the necklace.
The second question was, why do you not condemn the practice of necklacing?
Yes. We have said, and I would like to repeat, that we do not approve of the necklacing. It gives satisfaction to some people. It doesn't to the ANC. It doesn't to us. We have communicated to our people and are communicating to say we do not approve of this necklace method of dealing with opponents. We have not condemned it because we recognize the circumstances which brought it about. It's not traditional to our people to use the necklace. It is something which emerged out of the brutalities, the unutterable brutalities practiced by the police against our people. The brutality with which they killed and continued to kill day after day. And the streets were filled with people killed brutally. Individuals, leading individuals, brutally killed, kidnapped, taken to some place, killed there, and burnt up. It was actually introduced by the police or their agents. Why were the agents doing this? What did they have to gain in getting leading community personalities, liked and loved by the people, to be butchered so brutally? The agents had been offered what the South African police or government say is an offer you cannot refuse. You either serve and work for us, in which case we pay you, we'll give you anything you want, a Porsche car, thousands of rand, or we just kill you. As we kill so-and-so. So-and-so refused. Where is he now? What's happened to him? And also so-and-so said he would never work for us. Where is he? You know what happened to him. Numerous instances of this. Many good people come into our ranks, into the ranks of the ANC, and we discover they are agents. What happened? And they tell this story. So some of those who were close to the scene decided there is something worse that can happen to you than dying at the hands of the police. And they conceived of this method, which had been used by the police. The police had already burnt people that they kidnapped, who disappeared, and their bodies were found burnt somewhere. They borrowed that idea. So we say, well, we can't condemn. We can't condemn this. We've got to condemn the source of it. Who started? And even that burning by the police would not have come about if the Pretoria regime had listened to what everybody else in the world was saying, abandon apartheid before it is too late. This was the daily advice of editorials in South Africa. Editorials kept repeating, change before it is too late. There was no change. It became too late. So that is where the necklace comes from. We are trying to discourage it now, but we have a problem. Because the police like the necklace for this consequence on the image of the ANC. So they are sustaining it. They are organizing the necklace themselves. And then they report through their Bureau of Information that they found a body, a necklace body. They keep finding these bodies, even where those bodies do not exist. Or they actually arrange the perpetration of the crime against their leading opponents. this, it would already be something that belongs to history.
We're just about at the end of our program, and I'd like to ask you a two-part question, if I could, here, which is, which do you think is more likely to bring about speedily the proper results in South Africa? A better application of sanctions or intensification of armed struggle?
Thanks for the question. The struggle must, at all stages, be not only sustained, but intensified. It constitutes a form of pressure. The struggle does. Therefore, we must intensify this pressure. We think what has come inadequately was the other form of pressure, the external pressure, the sanctions. I think a combination of these two can bring about the result we seek. But there would have to be pressures of a certain level, which we haven't reached either within South Africa or by way of external pressures. So our call is for more sanctions, comprehensive sanctions. We continue to believe that comprehensive mandatory sanctions, we should observe by everybody, added to our effort internally, would bring about the result. And mandatory sanctions their effect would be to make it unnecessary for us to resort to more and more and more pressures, because the external pressure could take on some of the pressures that we might be required to employ ourselves in order to bring about change. So there's a correlation between internal pressures and external pressures in that sense. The less there are external pressures, the more you have to rely on internal pressures. The more, therefore, the conflict within will have to be escalated. But the more pressures you bring from without, the less does it become necessary for you to intensify and escalate before you get the desired result. So we have seen these two as complementary. And in our view, external pressures are lacking behind, although in that connection, we are gratified by the lead which the United States has taken in this matter. And we feel that the rest of Western Europe are letting us down, letting everybody down, letting all opponents of apartheid down by not at least measuring up to the level reached by the United States. It is for that reason that we consider it necessary to ask the Security Council to deliberate on this question and take a decision, making at least the United States packet of sanctions compulsory, mandatory, which would then have some binding effect on the rest of the world. These US sanctions repeated everywhere else will have a very important impact on our situation. But we still believe that for quick results, it is comprehensive sanctions that will save us the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of black and white South Africans before we settle down to a bit of sanity and talk about how to live together as South Africans.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of the National Press Club, I would like to present you with the Certificate of Appreciation awarded in recognition of your arriving here and of answering our questions, and present you with a copy of the Medallion of the National Press Club. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today to the National Press Club.
No, that's well, thanks very much for all the nice things. I'm coming.
It was very good. And I hope, can you take this here? Right. And here. Yeah. And there you go in that bag. So we have the Owl of Wisdom, the Dirk Minerva there. Every once in a while we even hear that. Yes. Very good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kim McCullough, America's Black Forum. This is William Bond. How are you?